Good morning, grade 12. We are now going to continue with the chapter 5 lessons. Today's topic is the desirable mix. So we are going to look at which policy is better for a country, whether it is import substitution or export promotion. And then we're also going to do a comparison between free trade and then protectionism. If you look at your exam guideline, that is what you need to know. Okay, just describe the concept of desirable mix, explain the desirable mix between import substitution and export promotion, and then protectionism and free trade. Then we are also going to look at trade liberalization, okay, the World Trade Organization, and then the different forms of economic integration. Economic integration we did touch on in grade 11 as well. Now this section, it is not for essay questions. It is possibly maybe a question here and there. They can throw in something in a data response question and short questions. Okay, but you won't get a full data response question on this section either. They will incorporate this with another topic. All right, so this is something mostly for short questions and parts of other questions. All right, so if we look at the desirable mix between import substitution and export promotion, right, now when we talk about these two, obviously it is not mutually exclusive, okay? So a country doesn't have to choose either, okay, I am going to do import substitution or I am going to do export promotion. Many countries started out by protecting their domestic industries, so they start off by using import substitution to strengthen their industrial base, and then once they feel more settled in and they actually have more industrial sectors in their country, then they can stimulate those industries to produce more, and then they switch to export promotion. All right, so many countries in the world started out with import substitution, and then later on, when they feel that the time is right, they will switch over to export promotion. So what we're saying is basically your import substitution can lead to export promotion. There were some countries though, remember it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, so there's some countries that tried import substitution. It wasn't a successful policy in their countries, like Pakistan, India and Argentina. So when it didn't work for them, they switched over to export promotion. Right, and there's other developing countries also that might benefit more from export promotion. Okay, remember when we do export promotion, when we export more things, it does bring foreign currency into the country. It is an injection into the country, which will multiply, so it has that extra benefit. Right, some countries also have a dual strategy where they have some measures of import substitution, but they also do export promotion. All right. Now, when we look at the statistics historically, recently in recent times, those countries that was focusing on export promotion more than import substitution, their economies outperformed the economies of countries that focused on import substitution. All right, so recently, countries that followed a policy of export promotion, they had higher economic growth rates than countries that used import substitution. All right, but obviously, as I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. Each country has to choose what works for them, and that will depend on the situation in the country. All right, so we have 3 examples here, okay? In a country where there is high levels of unemployment, the policy to choose would be import substitution. All right, because we would want to, because there's a high level of unemployment, it would create many jobs if we were able to start new industries. All right, so if we want to start new industries to replace those imported goods, obviously when we start new industries, a lot of jobs can be created for local people. All right, so we promote local producers, we encourage the establishment of new industries that didn't exist in our country, and obviously those industries would require employment of people. All right, so it will protect domestic jobs, it will create more jobs. But remember, we did say that if we do import substitution, other countries might retaliate. Now, if we slap import duties onto their products coming into our country, they might do the same to us. All right, which means that our exports will decrease and can potentially lead to job losses. It all depends on whether other countries retaliate or not. The second example, if we have a low economic growth rate and high inflation, obviously we need to create economic growth, we need to stimulate the economy in some way, and that can be done by increasing export revenue. Export is an injection, so a small injection will multiply and it can create higher levels of income, spending and production, which would create a higher economic growth rate. So in this case, export promotion might be a good strategy, but at the same time, imports might be needed to increase the variety and quantity of goods available if those shortages have led to inflation. Right, because obviously inflation comes, two different types of inflation, but if the demand exceeds the supply, we have demand pull inflation, which means prices are going up, and that is as a result of scarcity. So if we are unable to produce everything that we need ourselves, we might also need the imports, and then we will not use import substitution. Now we want to encourage, obviously, for more goods to come into the country, even if they do come from foreign sources, to reduce the scarcity in the country to bring down inflation. So we use export promotion to create the growth, and we allow for imports to come in to reduce scarcity and bring down inflation. The last example, if the country has a strong primary sector and a weak manufacturing sector, this will obviously be the case in many developing countries, then the government will want to trade freely with countries in the primary sector. So they would want to export as much of their primary sector goods and services as what they can, all right? And then no tariffs will be placed on the imports of raw materials or agricultural products because they want to encourage the exports of their primary sector output. But at the same time, because their manufacturing sector is weak, they would want to protect their industries that already exist. So infant industries might then be protected in terms of import substitution. All right, so they would have free trade in terms of agricultural goods, so that there's no levies and agricultural goods can flow freely between them and other countries, but they would need to then protect their infant industries in the manufacturing sector to give them a chance to develop. All right, so once again, they can make use of import substitution, right, to protect their local industries. Right, now once a country has decided what mix of free trade and protectionism best suits its economy, obviously now we need to find other countries that have similar objectives that would be willing to trade with us on our terms. So we have to ensure that we find trading partners that are willing to trade under the conditions that will suit us. Obviously there's many countries in the world, and not all those countries are going to be willing to trade with us on our conditions. All right, so when we enter into agreements then with these other countries, those are called trade protocols. We are going to look at trade protocols, I think later in today's lesson or in tomorrow's lesson. All right, now trade protocols have the combined effect of increasing the amount of trade that occurs between countries, but also restricting it by laying down rules for the way in which it occurs. All right, so when there's a trade agreement, you'll see when we go to the different forms of integration later on now that we have to obviously agree on certain things. There's different levels of these trade agreements, and the trading partners have to decide how they are going to trade with each other. Now, what are the rules for trade between each other? All right. We also have trade blocs that can make use of free trade and protectionism. This means that the member countries will pursue free trade with one another. So the countries that you have an agreement with, there's free trade between all the member countries, but obviously they have trade restrictions against non-members. All right, but we'll look at this in detail later on in this lesson. If we look at globalization, any restrictive practices, any form of protection that we can use, whether it's an import quota, whether it's a customs duty, foreign exchange control measures, sanctions, boycotts, all of them, they have the same effect. The idea is to reduce the potential volume of world production, and that would only be possible if there was free trade, if countries produced only those goods that they have a comparative advantage in. All right, so any kind of protection that we use is going to reduce the production in the world, right? Because countries are now not allowed to trade freely with each other, all right? But if there was free trade, then countries could really specialize In those goods they have comparative advantages in, countries can do mass production, leading to the lower costs, but obviously then trade with one another, provided that we have free trade. Okay, now in order to kind of force countries towards free trade, there was an independent facilitator was necessary, somebody that could make the rules for free trade, what is allowed, what is not allowed. And that organization is the World Trade Organization. Okay, we're going to look at the World Trade Organization in detail later on. Okay, but globalization, the fact that countries are trading with each other more than ever, the volume of trade around the world have increased. It is exceedingly easy for countries to trade with one another. We buy imported goods without even realizing it sometimes. And the fact that it's happening more easy, it's easier for people to trade, it's easier to order stuff online from other countries, etc. So obviously we needed somebody to kind of make rules of engagement. Now, how is this exactly going to work? And that person was the World Trade Organization. Right. Now, if we look at economic integration, okay, this is very important. Okay, this is the only thing that they can maybe ask as an 8-mark discuss question, this and the World Trade Organization, to discuss the World Trade Organization, but they haven't done that in a long time. Okay, so when we talk about economic integration or the different trade protocols, as I said, there's 5 levels of integration. If we just look at the definitions first, we distinguish between economic cooperation and economic integration. Economic cooperation is any combined action taken by 2 or more governments in partnership to promote the interests of their countries. So basically, economic cooperation is when the governments of 2 or more countries decide that they are going to cooperate more closely with each other in terms of international trade so that it could benefit all of those member countries. Economic integration is the actual steps that we are taking to start cooperating more closely. All right, so economic integration refers to physically removing any trade barriers that at the moment restrict the flow of goods and services between the member countries, as well as the flow of factors of production. So economic cooperation is the intention. Okay, it's when governments make the intention clear that they would like to cooperate more closely, the negotiations is going to start. Economic integration is the actual steps that they take, where they physically start to do certain things to promote free trade. They start to remove barriers to trade, start to remove barriers that makes it difficult for factors of production to move between the countries. Okay, now if we look at the steps, the first step is called a free trade area. Okay, so when you have a free trade area, a trade protocol called a free trade area, this means that member countries will remove all trade restrictions between themselves, but they are free to apply whatever restrictions they wish on non-members. All right, so basically if we have a free trade area, if there's a free trade area between South Africa and America, for example, that means that goods and services can flow freely between South Africa and America without any restrictions, no customs duties, no quotas, no sanctions, nothing. Goods and services flow freely between us because we have a free trade agreement. But because it's a free trade agreement, it only goes to the flow of goods and services. And whenever we trade with other countries that are not members of our free trade area, South Africa, when we trade with Europe, for example, we will have certain restrictions. America will have their own restrictions when they deal with the UK. All right, so literally all this means is that goods and services will flow freely between the 2 or more member countries, but each member country will decide on their own restrictions on trade when dealing with non-members. Okay, and obviously the type of protection will differ from one member country to the next. Now, each member country will decide what form of protection they will want to use against non-members. Just remember, they can't use it against each other. Then there's no free trade area. All right, so examples of free trade areas in the world is NAFTA, that's a North American free trade area, obviously in Northern America. Then there's CARICOM, that's 15 Caribbean nations that have this agreement amongst themselves. We have ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And then for us, the relevant one for us is the SADC, the Southern African Development Community. If you memorize one example, it is this one, the SADC, We are going to look at the SADC in detail in the next lesson. All right. Basically, your free trade area then means that member countries, there's no restriction on the flow of goods and services between member countries, and each member country will have their own restrictions that they will use against trade with non-members. The second step is called a customs union. This takes it one step further. All right, so you have a free trade area, and now we're going to build on the free trade area. So when we have a customs union, it means that when we have an agreement, member countries, there will be a free flow of goods and services between member countries, and what is added now, any kind of restrictions between member countries and non-members will also be standardized. All right, so just takes it one step further, where there's a free flow of goods and services between member countries, and member countries also use the same restrictions in terms of trade with non-members. Okay, so no country can reduce or increase or change those protectionist measures without being in contravention of the customs union agreement. So if we have a customs union, then we have to agree with all the other member countries how we are going to deal with trade with non-members. If we decide we're going to do a customs duty, all member countries have to use a customs duty when we trade with non-members. All right, examples of a customs union is Mercosur. Okay, that's Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela. You can add in here the Southern African Customs Union, SACU. Okay, that is also one that we are going to look at in the next lesson. Okay, and if you remember one, you remember SACU. S-A-C-U, Southern African Customs Union. Right. The third step of integration is when we establish a common market. Right, with a common market, again, the customs union is taken one step further. So in terms of a customs union, member countries, there will be a free flow of goods and services between member countries, and all member countries will use the same restrictions against trade with non-members. With a common market, what is added now is there's also the freedom of movement of other production factors. So in other words, if there's a common market, goods and services can flow freely between member countries, as well as labor and capital and money. Okay, so this means that if we have a common market with another country, it would mean that people can decide to live and work in South Africa, or they can decide to live and work in one of the other member countries freely, without work permits, without visas and any kind of legal requirements. If there's a common market, people and goods and services can move freely between the different member countries. All right, South Africa is not in a common market agreement with anybody. Right, the next one is your economic and monetary union. In your grade 11 textbook, this was split in two. I'm also going to explain it separately. Okay, when there's a monetary union means that, again, it is a common market taken one step further. Right, so in a monetary union, there will be the free flow of goods and services between member countries, the same protectionist measures against non-members, freedom of movement of production factors, and now they're going to adopt a single currency. They're going to have one central bank, and it's going to determine monetary policy for all member countries. All right. An example of the monetary union, the only one that exists in the world at the moment, is the European Union. All right. So in the European Union, there's European countries that have now established a monetary union. That means that all those countries had to abandon their own currencies. They were given a couple of years, okay? They abandoned their own currencies. Their own individual currencies does not exist anymore. All of the European Union countries had to use the euro. Now, the only currency that is valid there now is the euro, and they've got one central bank. So if the central bank decides that interest rates must go up, interest rates will increase across all monetary union countries. Right, all member countries will have their interest rates pushed up then. All right. So as I said, a monetary union, there's only one, and that's the European Union. There is on the cards in Africa, you'll see later on when we talk about it, the African Union, but that's long way from happening. Okay, we did look at this last year. Okay, we discussed this last year in class. It's not going to happen anytime soon. All right, if we take it one step further, then we go to an economic union. Right, so an economic union is everything included up to the monetary union. So there will be freedom of goods and services flowing between countries. There will be similar protective measures against non-members, freedom of movement for production factors, one single currency, one central bank, one monetary policy. But then to make it an economic union, there will also be one government and one fiscal policy. And this exists nowhere in the world. All right. Obviously, power is lekker. Governments don't just give their power up. I'm not going to say, okay, I don't want to run this country anymore. We choose one common government. That's not going to happen anywhere. All right. But if it is an economic union, it would literally be one government that will rule all the member countries and one fiscal policy. So if that one government puts taxes up, taxes will go up across all member countries. All right. Short lesson today. I'm going to send you the activity just now.